To begin with, what is income inequality? Income inequality, as Sutter defines, is how evenly or unevenly income is distributed within a society. So the topic here is growing income inequality is a problem for business and society. And I would have to argue and say that it is not a problem for business and society. So to begin with, income inequality measures the wealthiest person compared to the poorest person. So it's a broad range of individuals, and income inequality isn't taking the following factors into consideration, which are people have different qualifications, different experiences, different degrees, and some people have no degrees and different intellectual levels. So with all these factors not being considered, it's really not painting an accurate picture of this income inequality gap. So another thing that income inequality really lacks is the idea of innovation. So innovation, when you're thinking of income inequality, is a little tricky because when a product or service is successful and is implemented into the marketplace, it is actually widening the income inequality gap. So obviously the person who is introducing the product or making the product is getting money and is probably getting rich off it. And so that's making that wealthy and poor scale much wider. But on the flip side, the product or service is going to make the consumer's life easier, more efficient, and usually these products or services are at a price that the average person can afford. And so even though you're widening that gap, you've made a product or service that benefits the individuals. And so when we have this innovation idea, and we're creating this market that allows innovators to freely have these ideas and deliver their products and services, we allow competitors to enter the market, which again, they're going to drive down those forces, and the consumer is going to be more well off when we have a market that is competing. And so income inequality, again, just isn't taking those things into consideration. So a couple great examples of people who have widened the income inequality gap but increased consumers, I would say, standards of living are John Rockefeller. So of course he began selling kerosene in the 1870s, and during that time he had about 4% of the market. And so then by 1890 he had 85% of the market. So he had acquired way over half of the market. And then from 1869 to 1897, the gas price went from 30 cents to 6 cents. So of course that helped the average person be able to afford kerosene. And then back in the day, kerosene had a lot of usage, and people were allowed to have lights and different things that they were never able to have before because they were too expensive. So he made it more of a convenience, and he increased living standards, but at the same time he was making a lot of money and getting richer. So he made luxuries a common good. And so with decreased gas prices, he also inspired people like Henry Ford to create the Model T car. So again, we're back at that innovators idea, increasing it, but income equality isn't looking at that. And so another person who made just the average man's, I would say, life easier would be Robert McCulloch, and he made a one-man chainsaw in the 1940s, and he sold over 100,000. So of course he was able to sell these chainsaws, which allowed people to cut their trees down faster, and they were sold at a price that the average person could afford. So again, we are increasing our living standards and making them better for the consumers, and we're driving those prices down. So I think that income inequality really needs to be changed in the way people think about it. So instead of worrying about whose problem or who should fix it, we need to worry about stimulating the market and ways we can have economic growth. So, people always think that we should tax people more or tax the wealthier, which may be a solution. But again, if we take money out of their pocket or reduce what they're taking home, then that money is not going to come back to the market. So we want people who have these ideas and thoughts to be able to take the money and put it back in the market so other people can ultimately have better ideas and stimulate better products and better services. And so one example would be from like the 200s or 2000s is when TVs used to cost like $2,000 and now they cost $500. So if we keep the money in these innovators' pockets, we'll stimulate the market, which will ultimately come back to us. And so income inequality just really isn't taking those things into consideration. And I think that is what is the biggest factor. And so I don't think you can blame businesses and society for income inequality when that's not the issue that's going on. So again, I think that we need to worry more about economic growth than the income inequality because we're measuring it in incorrect ways. So if we're making our lives better, but the income inequality gap is getting bigger, who's suffering? I don't think it's the average person. I think we're getting the good prices. We can afford the things we once couldn't afford, and we have services and products we once didn't have. So our lives are getting easier, and we're having things we never had before. So I really think that people just need to change their mindset on income inequality when it comes to business and society.